the president of Cooperative Systems. And today we're going to be exploring kind of a hot topic in the world of technology. We're going to talk about the cloud today. A ton of businesses are kind of hitting a critical crossroads here. Either they're at the end of their useful life of their server equipment and need to decide whether to purchase new physical server equipment, or maybe they've started using some cloud-based software applications in the past and would like to streamline their data storage going forward. Whatever the case, they're faced with kind of a pretty big decision. Do they continue to maintain traditional on-premise servers, or does it make sense to look at that transition to cloud-based servers? I'll start by saying every business out there is certainly unique. There's no two businesses with identical needs, resources, tools, goals, et cetera, and so on. So knowing that, it's important to approach technology decisions with that in mind. When it comes to cloud hosting versus on-prem solutions, there's certainly no one-size-fits-all solution. Every business has its own factors and pros and cons to analyze for themselves. One other important note I want to make before we dive in here is that things are almost always more complex than they first appear. You know, the decision might seem simple, but it's certainly so much more important to dig in deeper and look at all the details before you make that decision. So here's kind of a brief guide just to help you along in the process. Regardless of the circumstances that have led you to consider your options, you're faced with a few options that you have to investigate. So let's talk about those. We're going to address some of the concerns for so many businesses, like security, sharing of data, and the costs involved in these respective options. Businesses have the option to host everything on-premise with local servers, or host everything in the cloud and eliminate that on-prem storage. But there's also a third option or set of scenarios, and that's what we call the hybrid model. We're going to address that today as well as we talk through these options and scenarios. All right, so before we get into the details on cloud hosting, we should talk about some of the kind of the good, bad, and ugly when it comes to local server hosting. When companies go the traditional route with local servers, they're storing data internally and managing those servers. Businesses who do this have tons of visibility, and they have access to their data with pretty much no latency. Access is quick and straightforward. They get the data over their local network without even having to connect to the internet. So that sense of control and sense of security is very attractive to a lot of small businesses and small business owners. As you'd expect, there's kind of some drawbacks though. First of all, if you're hosting locally and want to have resiliency against the unknown, you really need a strong backup and disaster recovery strategy, outlined also with a full policy around that. Otherwise, there are major implications for data corruption or loss if you had an event. If something happens to the server itself, is it backed up? Have you tested those backups? What if there's a cybersecurity attack? How do you recover from those attacks, and what do you need to recover from them? This would all be accounted for in that solid, kind of disaster recovery plan. A second huge potential downside to the on-prem dedicated server approach is the amount of capital expenses it could require. The cost of ownership is high, and businesses often have to overinvest in order to make sure those servers have the capacity they need in those strange situations. You can't just plan for everything being steady. You got to think about the peak times and requirements and plan for those and designing the right solution. Along those same lines, local servers suck up operational expenses like power, cooling, and having a good environmental environment in the server room and network room, and then as well as the staff you'll need to maintain and operate the hardware and software involved. So that's a lot of times a big underestimated expenditure in some cases. Before we move on here, I want to address a question that we tend to get often, and the question is our local servers actually safer than cloud hosting? Well, cloud vendors spend a lot more on securing their systems and incorporating those security measures than any small business would ever be able to do themselves. With appropriate permissions and encryption and authentication methods in place, the cloud can be considered more safe than on-prem hosting in most scenarios. As I mentioned, it's more complex than it first appear. So believe it or not, on-prem hosting users suffer more incidents on average than those of cloud-hosted environments because of that level of security. And they also experience significantly more brute force attacks against their infrastructure than those cloud environments. So although the cloud may feel insecure because of the sense of ownership and control and having that data out there, the physical location of the data storage matters much less than the means of accessing the data and the governance of the data. All right, so now let's talk about the cloud. Certainly some clear advantages to going this route. First of all, you might be surprised at the security on this list of strengths of the cloud, but as I talked about a moment ago, the means of access and tightening the storage and communication of data is really the core of whether or not the cloud protects your data better or better than your local storage. So that said, don't overlook the huge importance of due diligence when vetting your third-party hosting provider and making sure they have the right policies and procedures in place. Secondly, accessibility is a huge advantage of using the cloud. Users get remote access to the data hosted elsewhere. So no matter where your team is located, they can access that information and collaborate from wherever they are. And with cloud, you also have to be concerned about the physical storage space and operating expenses that come with the on-prem servers. Your hosting company would be accountable for all of that, so they are able to scale the storage, the connectivity, and all the services involved in scaling that up or down. And it's lower maintenance in that manner. Another huge pro to cloud is that it's extremely adaptable to your unique requirements. It's highly customizable to the way your business needs to use it, and it's fantastic for meeting the demands of organizations who have scalability concerns. And last but certainly not least on the list of pros for going to the cloud is the fact that backups and disaster recovery are basically built into that model. So in a cloud environment, copies are regularly maintained of electronic records and all your data and as a security measure. Cloud hosting providers can provide a number of options for recovering data or implementing failover techniques in the case of any of those types of disaster or failure events. So there are some serious concerns to take into account on the other side of the coin when considering to pursue cloud hosting. First of all, there's no direct offline access when you're hosting in the cloud. If you've got connectivity problems from your office or from wherever you're connecting in from, that can certainly interfere with access to your data and to your software systems. And issues with that connection can also affect day-to-day experience if your internet is slow or intermittent. So you got to have a solid internet connection and a redundant internet connection from wherever your primary access location is. And that can also complement disaster recovery procedures, as you might imagine. So when you're considering the cloud, you got to take into account, whether your connection can handle all of those requirements. And like I said before, due diligence is key. Making sure that your third-party providers are qualified with regard to regulatory compliance needs and all the mandates within your industry as well. Sensitive data absolutely has to be secured, and privacy has to be considered as well. It's your responsibility to vet those third parties and make sure they comply with your business requirements. So if you're subject to any industry-specific regulatory measures, such as HIPAA for healthcare, PCI DSS if you process credit card transactions, any of those countless other regulations, it's important to know that where your data is, who has access to it, and how it's secured. Got to make sure you have super strong contracts as well with those third-party service providers to protect yourself and your data, regardless of what happens. While it is true that you're not maintaining all the hardware and software and the maintenance costs associated with the local servers, you're still paying for the resources you're using in the cloud. That price will adjust according to the resources you consume. Pay-as-you-go models seem great at first until surprises hit. On the other hand, prepaid cloud can also seem nice as well since it's fixed, but paying for unused resources is sometimes a hard thing to swallow, even in the interest of avoiding high unexpected charges with pay-as-you-go options. So you got to carefully consider, all the different line items in your cloud agreement, since that's kind of the basis for what you'll see on your bills. And cost can kind of take on many different forms. Have you considered the cost of HR when more IT people are needed to manage on-prem servers instead of the cloud? And how about the cost of regulatory compliance violations? There's super, tough to capture costs, but whereas like downstream costs might, if your data became unavailable to you and your team, what are the implications there that you have to consider during a potential outage or some sort of disaster? Now, with a hybrid approach to data storage, you can choose to keep certain sensitive data in-house or certain applications in-house, but host all of your other documents and data and other applications in the cloud. Or maybe you want to back everything up onto a cloud server, but host your data in-house, or vice versa. Your business might actually be using some cloud for some applications already, as I initially mentioned, or a combination of multiple scenarios. So you should account for that in making your decision about how to streamline operations and data sources, and building kind of a solid backup and disaster recovery plan, as we've talked about. And for certain workloads or applications that certain organizations require, the cloud may not even yet be an option. And how does that work into your strategy? So we always recommend having a high-level, holistic approach to this evaluation and take into account all the ways and places that your company is storing your data and using your data and how you access your data. Before you make your decision, there's kind of some important questions to ask. So first of all, how much storage and bandwidth do we need? And what does that data include? Secondly, are our data needs consistent, or do they fluctuate? Do we have ebbs and flows of people accessing our data? Does our amount of data go up and down over the course of a given year or years, and why? Next question would be what are our operational needs that we're looking to address? Are we looking to be more scalable? Are we looking to be more available? Are we looking to have more remote workforce? Next thing would be, do we have the flexibility to cover varying costs of a cloud subscription? And alternatively, are we able to invest the appropriate capital for local servers if we're considering an on-prem server solution? Next question, do we have the physical space and bandwidth to install and secure and maintain those local servers properly? Next is, if not, who will be responsible for security and maintenance of cloud services? So if we're not going to have an on-prem service, who's going to be responsible for the cloud environment? And lastly, what are our requirements and what is driving those? Is there regulatory compliance, and what are the things we have to be concerned about when we are crafting an appropriate solution for our business? So we hope this helps you kind of determine whether the cloud is truly right for your business and how you might be able to leverage these cloud technologies to be more efficient and hopefully more profitable as a business. Certainly don't hesitate to get in touch with us. And if you have any other questions about your options for storing and managing data, we'd be happy to talk with you and help you analyze and go through that and assess what the right solution is and scenario is for your business going forward. In the meantime, thanks for tuning in, and hopefully you'll join us for the next episode of Tech Tips from CoopSys. Take care.